Hello once again, everybody. ODAT Nerd here with another video on our Simple Notes plugin that we have been building up through this small series of live video recordings. And I thought for today's video, we would create some quality of life improvements in our plugin to make it a little bit easier to use. And so let's get started. And here we are back in Sublime Text, looking at the plugin that we have been slowly building up over this video series. If you're unfamiliar with this plugin and what it's for, there is a link down in the description to the first video in the series that explains it and goes through how this all came about and how this code works. And newly introduced for this video and back introduced for existing videos, there's also a link in the description to the code for this particular video. And for this video, the previous two videos, and any that are going forward as the videos become available on the YouTube channel, the link in the description will take you to the GitHub repository that contains the code for that particular plugin. That repository also contains the configuration I'm using for my Sublime text here. In case you see me doing things and your Sublime doesn't do those things, chances are good that's the reason why. But now let's go ahead and get started with our quality of life improvements here. Now this plugin all works, and the sample that I have over here in this tab is just a small sample of things, and uh, it all fits nicely within this one screen. And so when we run the command and say we want to move tag 5 to the top, tag 5 goes to the top. You can see the cursor is left at the place where the top of the file used to be. And even if I was to bring the cursor down to here and jump tag 5 to the top, the cursor remains where it is. Now, for our purposes in this sample note file, that's okay because we can still see the tags and the notes all in the same screen. But what if this file was really long? What if there was a lot of notes in this particular one? And we went way up here, and now we're looking at line 25 of the file, and when we run the command, we say we want tag 1 to be at the top. Well, it is, but we can't see it. And I would presume that if you were trying to bring all of the tags of a certain, uh, all of the tags of a certain type to the top, you probably want to be at the top so that you can actually look over all of those tags and see your actual notes. How actually would we do that? That is actually fairly simple to do. We're going to go over here to the plugin and skip down to here. This is the point at which we insert the text that we have removed for each of those note paragraphs that jumped to tag 2 to the top of the file. Now, the first position in the file is visible at the top of the buffer. But notice that the cursor is still at the position that it was at when I started. And maybe that's what we want, and maybe it's not. Right now, there's only one paragraph that's tagged with what I moved up to the top, so I can still see it. But what if there were 50 paragraph tags in here and I did this? Well, I maybe want to, maneuver around within those paragraphs to select text. If there was a note that was a code snippet, for example, now I'm going to have to remember what sequence of keys jumps me to the top of the file. But as it transpires, we also can make Sublime do that for us too. And to do that, we have to work with the selection in the buffer. I'm going to write this first and then explain it second. So the first thing we're going to do is say for the selection that's currently in this view, I want you to clear that selection, get rid of it entirely. And then we want to add a new selection, and the selection that we want to add is a single region that's position 0. Now, I'm going to save that, and we'll jump over to this file and once again position ourselves like so, run the command, and well, tag 5. Tag 5 is the one to come to the top. Now it's at the top and the cursor has jumped up to the top as well. Now, what is the selection exactly? Well, we can actually look that up. If I was to say selection class, we would see that the selection class maintains a set of regions ensuring that none overlap and they're kept in sorted order, which means there can be more than one selection in a file. And I think as Sublime Text users, we know that that's the case. And so the self.view.cell method, the cell method on the view class, returns this selection class, an instance of it that's associated with the selection in this view. And there are various things we can do with it. Clear removes all of the regions. Add adds regions back. You can also add multiple regions. Subtract some selection if you need to. Just see if a point or a region is inside of the selection, and so on. Now, it's worth pointing out here, this might be counterintuitive, but as we can see right now in this help window, I have one selection. It's the word selection that's selected, right? I can have multiple selections, and of course, this is one of the features of Sublime. But what if there's no selection and there's just 4 carets? These actually also represent selections. It just so happens that they're A and B, the 2 points that the region spans, are both the same point. And so visually, they don't appear to be selection at all. So over here in the plugin, what we're saying is whatever selection there is, however many cursors there are in the file, whatever selection they may be covering, wherever they are, get rid of them all. Next, add one selection back, and the selection is a region that both starts and ends at position 0. The region constructor can take 1 or 2 arguments. If you pass 2 arguments, one of them becomes the beginning of the selection, the other one becomes the end. And if you pass 1 value, as a convenience, it's just used the same for both. And then the last thing we do is tell it to jump up to that location. And so that is totally doing what we want. Now, if we have a note file, if there are many notes, if the paragraphs attached to the tags are very long, no matter what we do, when we skip to the top of the file, when we skip notes to the top of the file by tag, we'll still be able to see the top of the file, which I think is something that's particularly important. And this brings up also an important note, if you will. Up to now, we've assumed that the file contains a line with 1 or more tags, then the contents of the notes that are associated with that tag, then another tag line with more tags, and then more notes, and so on down the file. And that's always been the first line. But what if there were a bunch of spaces here? And I wanted to move tag 2 to the top of the file. It does that, and now there's a bunch of gap there. And why? Because there's a bunch of gap between this line and the top of the file. And position 0, this first point, character 1, line 1, that's where things move. For this purpose, that's suboptimal, but it gets worse. What if there was a paragraph of text here? Some sort of lead-in to the notes file before the notes actually happen. And then we decided we want to move tag 1 extended to the top of the file. Well, it moved, And now the text that was at the top of the file is considered to be part of that tag. And if I now say move tag 5 to the top of the file, it moves up. This paragraph that used to be the first thing in the file that described what the file was all about is now lower down in the file. Its original position has been lost. That's not a particularly good thing. That's not something we want. But as it transpires, again, this is something that's fairly easy to fix. Now, if we think about this logically, what our plugin is doing is saying we want tag 2 to jump to the top of the file. So the area that needs to be moved starts right here, the start of the line that contains tag 2, and goes all the way to technically here. All of the line that contained the tag, all of the content that follows it, right up to but not including the beginning of the next line of tags. Where exactly do we want this to move? Up to now, we've always moved it to position 0 in the file, which is the top, but that's not where we want this text to go. Where we really want this text to go is here, where the first line of tags is actually in the file. And if we were to take this set of lines and move them here, the top paragraph would still be maintained. And how exactly could we do that? Well, this is the point at which the text that has been removed is being inserted back, and it's being inserted at position 0. But what we actually want is, as I said, the position of the first line of tags in the file. And as it happens, we totally know where that location is because we have on line 26 a list of regions that are every line of tags in the file, and they're ordered from the top down. So if we were to ask tag lines, am I calling it tag lines or tag regions? I'm calling it tag regions. I'm sorry, that tag lines is the file line I'm talking about there. This is why you got to be careful about doing things live. Tag lines on line 22 is the list of regions containing all of the lines of tags. And that means that in that list, the first item in the list is the region of the first line. And we can get the beginning point. Now, previously we used line.a, end.a, because a region has an A and a B. And I would normally actually use region.a for this because we know that in that region, the first item is always the start of the line and the end is always the end of the line. But I'm doing this to point out that while a region has an A, that's the first end of the region, and a B, that's the second end of the region, which can be less than A, in which case the region is reversed, which, as we talked about previously, means that in the selection, the cursor appears on the left of it instead of the right. There are also these methods begin and end, which figure out which of those two numbers is smaller and returns that one instead. So whether the region goes left to right or right to left, begin always gives you the lowest point and end always gives you the highest point. And that's why we're doing that here. So this position here, this represents the position at the new top of the file. So I'm going to say top is equal to that value. And now this 0 can become top. But we probably also want these to be top. Now, these two here are judgment calls. These being changed from 0 to top means that when the cursors jump to the top of the file, it's jumping to the first line of tags and not to the literal top of the file. Now, perhaps for your own use, you actually want the tags to jump the cursor to jump to the top of the file even if there's a paragraph. Or perhaps if you're like me, you actually want the cursor to jump to the position where the tagline was just moved. So if I was to come down like so and pick tag 4, now you can see that first paragraph is still the first paragraph. The two groups for tag 4 are underneath them, and the cursor was at the actual location where we moved the text. So those are some nice changes to make. Now, here's something else that we may perhaps be interested in as far as usability of this is concerned. Now, again, this goes to how our tests have gone so far. Originally, this file was short and fit on one screen, but you see, this last one has a lot of stuff in it. And then I might decide I want to quickly jump to another point in the file, or at least to the top of this section. And there's a lot of key presses, or using the mouse to scroll in the scroll bar like this, or in the mini map if you happen to have it open. I don't tend to use the mini map. And in that case, it's sort of hard to navigate around in the file. Now, of course, we could always pick a tag to jump to the top, but perhaps we want to maintain the current order and just be at the top, and we have a keystroke that will take us to the top. But what if you wanted to be in the middle? What if you wanted to be at the first instance of a certain tag? Say you're not actually interested in consolidating all of the tags at the top of the file, but you just sort of want to skip through and see, look at them and keep the file the way it is. How could we do something like that? And the answer to that is to use the symbol list, which is this character here, or if I was to pick go to symbol from the menu, if you're more familiar with that. Now, we're not seeing anything here, and that's because we haven't told Sublime what symbols look like in this file. Symbols are related to the scoping of a file, which is related to the syntax of a file. By way of example, I'm going to use view package file to look at the default symbol list preferences. This is an XML file, TM preferences file. This is something that's inherited from TextMate. And this is providing a meta information. The name of this file actually doesn't really mean anything. The important parts are what the key is and what the value of that key is. Now, this is actually a plist file. If you're a Mac person, I'm just going to quickly turn off word wrap for this. If you're a Mac person, you're probably aware of what a plist is. I think, I don't know. But it's an XML file that represents a dictionary. So this could actually be represented as a JSON file, and fingers crossed, perhaps a future version of Sublime will bring that in. So in this dictionary, the key is name, the symbol is symbol list, the key is scope, the value is this string, the key is setting, the value is this. And this is saying that by default, things with the scope, entity.name.function, entity.name.type, and meta.talkList are things that show up in the symbol list, because this variable show in symbol list has a value of 1. So if we wanted to, we could create a similar file for our own purposes. And so let's do that. And I'm going to go ahead and save as this file. And I'm going to save it into my user package. And I will call it, instead of symbol list, let's call it notes symbols, because the name of the syntax we created is right here, notes.sublime syntax. So I'm going to name it that. And we can see as soon as I did that, right in the console, that line said generating meta info summary. In fact, every time I save the file, it says that, because every time you modify a package resource, much like the plugin, Sublime automatically reloads it. Now, right now, This file is read-only because I used view package file to open it, and that creates a file that's read-only so that you don't accidentally mess with the file. So I'm just going to quickly close that and reopen it. And perhaps I can turn word wrap off again. Now, I'm going to delete these. Sublime doesn't actually use this particular field. It's something that TextMate uh, I presumably finds interesting. Sublime ignores this. And as a universally unique identifier, it seems wrong to me on general principles, even though Sublime ignores this, to have two files with the same key in it. So I'm going to delete it, but that doesn't really matter. But what we want to do here is change this scope. And we can change it from that to, now if we don't remember what exactly is the scope of a tag, it is entity.name.tag. So we could skip over to here and say entity.name.tag. Save the file. It generated meta info. When I open this and press the key, boom, here are the list of tags. And now you can see as I scroll through them, behind me, behind the panel, Sublime is automatically going to that location. And when I hit enter, it's selected there, and you can also, if there were a lot of tags, you can quickly narrow in. And if you remember from the previous video, using a scope of entity.name.tag caused us problems when we were working on this code in the plugin and using the syntax to find the tags. And the same is true from here. If we were to create an HTML file, we are seeing the tags in this file. Maybe that's interesting to somebody. I don't think it's a particularly good idea myself, but we can totally fix that by coming over here and adding on to this tag to say not just entity.name.tag is the scope that should be in the symbol list, but actually text.plain.notes entity.name.tag. So only instances of the scope entity.name.tag that are inside the scope text.plain.notes. And now if I come to this file, the symbol list is empty, but in this one, it's the tags. So that's doing what we want. Let's get rid of that scratch buffer. We're going to go ahead and close that file for the time being. That is now all completed. This might bring us to another thing that we want to do here. You'll note when I do this, tag 5 is selected. What if I decided that I actually want to jump this to the top of the file now? Or for that matter, what if I was just, going through the file and I stopped here and said, yeah, this tag, I want to view all of the instances of this. Right now, I'd have to use the key binding that I created in that first video and then say I was in foo tag, so pick foo tag. Or if I was on tag 4, I'd say, well, I'm currently on tag 4. I need to remember tag 4. That's the one to bring to the top of the file. It works, but Sublime is all about making our lives sublime. So how can we actually, is there some way that we can enhance our navigation? And as a matter of fact, there is. We're going to do a couple of things here. We're going to add the ability to look up the tag that's currently under the cursor, and also, if that's not the case, perhaps if there's selected text, as there was when we used the symbol list, we could just see if that's a tag and use that. And this is going to be a few lines of code, so we're going to add a new helper function up here, and I'm going to call mine tag under cursor, which is not 100% descriptive of what it is, because it's going to not only grab text from under the cursor, but possibly also the selection. But, name it what you will. Perhaps you might want to call it tag from selection, since technically the cursor is selected text, even if it's a region of 0. Now let's say that by default, this returns a value of none to mean that there's no tag under the cursor. And if that was the case, we could come over here and say the tag is equal to the tag that was provided as an argument, or if there was no tag provided, if that's a falsy value, then it can be tag under cursor self.view. And just like that, if this was to return none, which it does right now, then the results of that would be to do what we're already doing. So if I was to push the key, then it's calling tag under cursor. Tag under cursor is returning none. None or none is still none. And if tag is none, prompt for a tag. Here we go. But if we were instead to add a line here that says return tag 5, for example, then when we were over in this panel, if I was to hit the key, tag 5 instantly jumps to the top of the file. So with just those 3 lines of code, we've already enhanced the functionality of this, albeit in a way that we could have done because we could have passed tag 5 as a parameter. But tag under cursor can now investigate the buffer to determine what tag it should actually be returning. So I'm going to remove this for the time being. And what exactly do we want to do here? Now, for sanity purposes, we're going to start like this. If the length of the view selection is equal to 1, then we want to do something. View.cell, as we already know, provides you the selection object reference for this particular view. There can be one selection if there's one cursor, if there is, like there is right now. There can be a length of 2 if there's 2 cursors, a length of 4 if there's 4 cursors. But if someone was to say view.cell.clear, there would be no cursors in this file. And we can actually verify that by saying view.cell.clear down here in the console. And now when I close it, you'll note it says in the status line 0 selected regions, and there's no cursor anywhere. And I have to click with my mouse in order to bring it back. Arguably, that's probably not ever going to happen. But as a defensive programmer, it's one line of code to make sure that something terrible doesn't happen in the case where that's the case. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, what are the 2 things we want to do? One thing we want to do is if the cursor is just sitting in a tag, try to pull that tag out and return its value. Or if there's some selected text, we could assume that that text is the text of the tag, which is what happens when you use the symbol list. That one's the easier one to do. So we're going to add that one first. We're going to say if not view.cell 0.empty. Then we want to do something. And what's this saying? View.cell, get the selection. 0, access the first selection, which we know is the only selection because we know there's only one selection because of line 18. If that selection is not empty, then there is selected text. And what do we want to do in that case? We want to extract that selected text and return it so that it can become the tag under the cursor and be the tag that is used over here in the command when we run it. And we already know how to do that. We use view.subster and we pass it the region to extract. And the region to extract is the one we were just looking at a second ago, view.cell 0. And we can return that value. And we no longer need that. Plugin still loads. If I come over here, now if I just run the command, I get prompted. If I was to select tag 2 when I run the command with the key binding, tag 2 instantly jumps to the top. So that is doing what we want. And as a sanity check, what if there was something that wasn't a tag that was selected? the status line says bring not found in this file, which again is one of those logical fallacies. Actually, it is found in the file. It just doesn't happen to be a tag that's in a tag line. So one thing that this could actually do as a future enhancement, if you wanted to, would be to verify that the first character here is a hash. This also doesn't handle the case where you have an entire paragraph that's selected. Now, bring to table win-win survival strategies to ensure proactive, and we didn't get to see the rest of the message. You have to pick and choose your battles, is what I'm saying. If the code reaches line 22, then there's one selection, but it's empty. In that case, we need to extract the text that's under the cursor. And this is going to be a couple of steps process. First of all, if we said view.cell0 like that, that is the first selection and only selection. And if we said begin, that's the minimum value of the two endpoints of the region, but totally fine for us to use A or B because we know it's empty. Both those values are the same. And let's just say that's some point in the buffer, the cursor location, if you will. Now we only want to extract the contents of the word under the cursor if the cursor is on a tag. And do we know how to do that? I believe we have done this in the past. We can use view.matchSelector. You may remember it from the isEnabled function method in the command that makes sure that this is a text.plain.notes file for the command to be enabled. And we know that the value that we have to pass to this is some position in the file and the scope to check to see if it matches. And the position in the file is that one we just gathered. And the scope is entity.name.tag because that's the scope applied to tags. So if this, then not only is there a single selection that's empty, that selection is sitting on a tag, so we can proceed. Now, the reason why I stored that in a variable, that pt, the point, is because we're going to use it here as well. Now, there's a method in the view class called, whoops, what happens when you talk while you're typing? It's called expand by class. And it's going to take a location and a class and it's going to expand a particular region. So let's take a look at the help for that, and I'll just scoot it over there for the time being. Whoops, so we can refer to it. Expand by class, and again, there are two of them. There's one that works with a point and one that works with a region. We are working with a point, so it's actually the one on line 231 there. We'll highlight that one just so we can view that a little easier. It expands the point to the left and to the right until each side lands on a location that matches classes, and it's a bitwise OR of some things that are a little upwards in the file. You can pass in separators to define what characters should be considered to separate words. If you don't provide that, it has its own default. Now, what's the location we want to use? We want to use point, the location of the cursor. And what class do we want to use? There are a couple. Let's just jump over. These are the values from this classify method, a bitwise OR of these flags. And what we want is the start of a word and the end of a word. That's what we're going to pass in here. And just to make the code a little nicer to look at, because these values are kind of long, we don't want it to shoot off the right-hand side of the screen. I'm going to say the expand class is sublime dot class word start, or Sublime class word end. And then we can change this to X class. So this is going to take a point. It is going to take our class of begin word and end word, and it's going to return back a region that is that point expanded to the left and right until each side lands on one of these. So it's going to go left until it hits a word start and right until it hits a word end and provide us the region. So let's go ahead and say tag region is that value because we're going to want to look at that value. And again, if that was the region that was used and we want to extract that text, how do we do that? We would use view.subster and the region, which is tag region. Now for our purposes, just to demonstrate some things, instead of returning this, I'm going to print it instead. As a matter of fact, let's say tag is that and go like so. And we can jump over to here, move into the sample notes file, and open the console. And if the cursor is somewhere in the text, when I run the command, we get prompted, and that's because view match selector isn't finding entity.name.tag underneath this. So if I moved it up to here and it was inside the tag and I ran the command, the console says tag is tag 2. That's more or less right, but we want it to have that hash mark on the beginning of it. And what's weirder, what if the cursor is here? Now, just to verify, this is entity.name.tag. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the key there. And we get prompted because this didn't return a value. It fell off the bottom and returned none on line 29. But notice that the tag is a dot and a couple of new lines and a hash character. And that's because from where the cursor currently is, the start of a word is the end of a word is found on line 4 near the end. Now this has everything to do with how by default the hash character is a word separator character, and so as the word separator character, it doesn't think that being on a hash is actually part of a tag. If I was to do it over here instead, again, we get prompted. Now see the tag is a space and hash mark because it only had to go left a little bit. Now, how exactly can we solve that? It's actually as simple as taking advantage of that thing we noticed here when we expand by class. We can optionally pass in separators to define what characters should be used to separate words. And we could say a space and a tab. Those are the only things for our purposes in this case that should separate words. I'm going to save that and we can go ahead and jump over here. And now if it's on tag 2, we get the text hashtag tag 2, which is what we want. If it's over here on tag 4, we get hashtag 4, which is what we want. In the middle, we don't get prompted at all because that's not scoped. If it's actually on the hash character when I do it, the tag is space hashtag 2. And over here, if I did it, it would be a bunch of spaces hashtag 2. And again, the reason for that is from this point, moving left to the next start or end of a word is still on line 4. And here it's right there. But that's also a particularly easy problem to fix because one of the things that you can do in Python is strip leading and trailing white space, which is a simple call like that. So now here on tag 4, it's hashtag tag 4. When it's on the hash, it's still tag 4. When it's in tag 2, it's tag 2. And when it's there, it's still tag 2. So now we know that is totally working, and we can go ahead and instead of printing it, we can return that value. The plugin still seems to load, and if we came over here with the cursor in tag 5, when I run the command, tag 5 jumps instantly to the top. If I'm in tag 4, tag 4 jumps instantly to the top. And remember, if I was to use the symbol list to quickly find a tag and say, what other notes do I have for foo tag? Let's bring those to the top. When I hit the key, foo tag jumps instantly to the top of the file. So with just these few simple changes, we have really enhanced our ability to navigate around in this particular file. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and revert back to our previous version of the file. Now, you may be saying, this is all great, that was all easy, but how am I supposed to know that I can be using match selector? How do I know I can use view subster? How would I know about view expand by class? And my answer to that is view the API reference. Now, as a plugin developer, this is information that you need to know. And there is quite a lot of it here. Lots and lots and lots. I can keep pushing the button, and as I go, we're seeing more things. We're seeing things about phantoms and phantom sets and the edit class and things you can do with a window and things you can do with an event listener, which sneak preview is going to be the focus of the next video after this one. There's so much stuff in here. Now, I hear you asking yourself, oh, that nerd, do you honestly expect me to look at this and memorize all of this stuff? And no, I mean, feel free to go ahead and do that if you want. Some people, nerdy people that create videos about Sublime Text on YouTube, they enjoy reading documentation, and probably when they get a new electronic device, they're excited to read the manual and see what it can do instead of play with the device first. But that doesn't mean that you have to be that way. You might be more normal. Now, I'm not saying you have to know everything in this and you need to know it by heart. I'm saying give it a look. Go on in and say, the view class, what's this? And just sort of scan down. Okay, set name. I could assign a name to a buffer. I could see if it's loading with is loading. Settings, that's something to do with a settings object. Window, something to do with a window. The point is not to memorize all of this stuff. The point is to just get it in your head that it's in there. Because when you are working with a plugin, you're going to want to think logically, what do I want to do? I want to grab the word that's under the cursor, or I want to grab the selection. And if you've been writing plugins long enough, like I have, you already have an inherent sense of, I know what I want to, I know what I need to do that. But if you don't, if you at least have a vague memory of what that API said, you would be able to say like, oh, I think I remembered seeing something about finding the beginning and end of a word in there. Maybe that's something I could use here. And then you could open the documentation, open that API page, and you'd be able to find that particular information and see what you need to do. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you can't think of how exactly you might go about it. In that case, maybe you just want to scan through that documentation anyway, just to see if the items in there spark any idea for how you could use those to match your current problem. And similarly, for that file that we created, the notes symbols file, how exactly are you supposed to know that this is something that you can create and even do for that matter? This isn't something you run across in everyday Sublime usage. And for that, I would say you should be looking at the unofficial documentation. This is a absolutely fantastic resource. I've gone through this many a time. There's a lot of this that tells you just how to get the most out of Sublime, and it also has complete references for things like the symbol list. It even has a search. So I could search for symbols, and this is telling me about file navigation in symbol searches and search and replace and metadata files. Maybe metadata files is the part that I want. Hey, look, it's totally telling me about metadata for indent. That's not what I'm doing right now, but that's probably good to know. If you were to look through this, you would see that there is various things in here uh, in the symbol list as you go through the documentation that gives you information on this. Now, to be sure, in this particular case, being able to look up symbols in the symbol list isn't the be all and end all of things. But if you're used to using Sublime, you might, if we were looking at the plugin, if you make use of the symbol list, then you would spark on that idea that, yeah, I'd like to be able to skip around in my notes files. How does that work? What's this called? The symbol list. Let's go ahead and look in the unofficial documentation and see if what it says about the symbol list. And as you look around, you would find how to do that. And not for nothing, but the official documentation is also something that you should be looking at. In particular, this section on the bottom on package development, which is going to give you information on not just the API reference, but also syntax definitions, um, which you may remember from the first video. That's the end of this video. It's been quite a long one. We have really enhanced the abilities of our particular plugin to make it a little easier to maneuver around. And I have at least one more video in me on this particular series. We are going to investigate event listeners and in particular being able to add our own completions to a file so that we could very easily create our note files. Now that we know how to navigate around in a note file, it'd be nice if it was easier to actually create one in the first place. That's the subject of another video. So I'd like to thank you for watching this one if you got all the way to the end. Remember, as always, if you have any questions, if you have ideas for topics in videos that you'd like me to cover or other plugin samples, feel free to leave those in the comment section below. Send me a message on Twitter, send me an email at odatnerd@gmail.com. Get in touch. Let me know how I can help you be a better Sublime Text plugin and package developer while I'm busy working on my comprehensive everything you ever wanted to know but were afraid to ask on package development. And of course, if you liked this video, if you found it useful, please hit that thumb button so that I know that I'm doing the right thing. And if you would like to see more videos, go ahead and subscribe and perhaps also hit the old bell icon if you want to be notified right away when videos become available. And for Sublime Text fanatics everywhere, I'm odatnerd, still saying, have a sublime day. Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be a thing now.